From earth, from water, our people grew to love each other in this manner. For in all our languages, there is no he or she. We are the children of the earth and of the sea.
That's the voice of legendary storyteller Alanis Obomsawin from her album Bush Lady. Alanis was born in 1932 and is a member of the Abenaki Nation. She spent her early years on the Odanak Reserve, then at the age of 6 relocated to Trois Rivieres, Quebec, where her family was the only Indigenous peoples in the community. Driven by the need for truthful and respectful education about Indigenous people, while in her early 20s, Alanis began performing as a singer and storyteller and toured in Canada, the US and Europe, including managing her own stage at the Mariposa Folk Festival in the 1960s. In the late 1960s, Alanis was hired as a consultant by the National Film Board of Canada, where she went on to become one of the most acclaimed Indigenous directors in the world, completing dozens of documentaries exploring the lives and concerns of Indigenous peoples, including violent conflicts such as the raids in the Micmac over fishing rights in the early 1980s and the historic Mohawk standoff at Oka. Alanis has an incredible list of well-deserved awards and honors, including honorary doctorates from the Universities of York, Carleton, UBC, Western, McGill, Concordia, and Dalhousie. In 1983, she was made a member of the Order of Canada. She's received the Governor-General's Performing Arts Award for Lifetime Artistic Achievement, the Glenn Gould Prize, the Prix Albert Tassier for contribution to Quebecois cinema, and many others. I'm your host, Warren Hoffman, and in this episode of Conflict, Power, and Persuasion, we hear from Alanis Obomsawin and take a walk through time discussing the struggles to realize Indigenous rights and the path to reconciliation. Some topics discussed include what it was like when Indigenous peoples were granted Canadian citizenship, the core values needed to connect with others, her experience being on the ground during the Oka crisis, leadership, the importance of connecting with elders and understanding your history, reconciliation, healing, apologies, and forgiveness, Nelson Mandela, Senator Murray Sinclair, storytelling through music, and much more.
This is Conflict, Power, and Persuasion, podcast of the Canadian International Institute of Applied Negotiation.
Hi, Alanis. It's an honor to have the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you.
You have over 6 decades of documenting stories of Indigenous people and in some cases violent conflict. And I'd like to get into that, but first hoping we can back up a bit. What experiences in your youth would you attribute to motivating and shaping your path as a storyteller?
Well, it's very personal. It's as I went to a school off the community. We moved to Trois Rivieres at the time, and I was the only Indigenous person there in the school. It was very bad. Like, I got beat up a lot by the other children, and it was a very bad time for all of us at that time. And I knew that there was something terribly wrong in the educational system to teach the history of this country with so much racism towards our people, with so much hate that they succeed to create for many generations with the people who were living here. And it took me a while to figure that out, but when I did, I started to really try to influence changes. That's how.
That must have been incredibly difficult. How did you find the strength to rise up above bullying and discrimination? Would you have any tips or wisdom for others that would be facing those challenges?
It was very difficult all around. It was difficult at school. It was difficult in the town also. And it really, education has a lot of power. Teaching children, young children, and then older ones that our people were inferior and that our language was Satan's language. You know, so people look at you as you are a very bad piece of human being. And this was the regular thing every day. So I thought as I grew older that I felt that the children had to hear a different story because children are not born racist. It's what they hear from the adults, and they often become like what they hear. And so I felt if they knew the real story of our country and of our people, they wouldn't hate us that much.
Yeah.
This is how I figured it out. And I started by talking with scouts and playing game with them and telling them stories. And eventually I got invited to go to different schools, and then I did hundreds of schools across the country. And this was in the early 60s. So I also did a lot of residential schools, plus regular school. And that was, I feel, that was the most important thing I did in my lifetime, to really give something to children that they could go about, which didn't have to hate us.
Yeah. I can imagine what a positive impact that had on so many youth across the entire country, as you said. But you also worked in prisons as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did a lot of touring at the prison, in many prisons, because in the 60s, someone told me, did you know that 68% of the prisoners are Indigenous? They'd say Indian at the time, they never said Indigenous or Native. And, First Nation and Inuit and Métis people. So I said, well, means my relations are in jail, I'm going to go visit them. And there's someone that helped me out for me to be able to enter the jails and go and talk to prisoners and sing for them. It was very, very interesting.
So you're a storyteller traveling across the country, working in prisons and schools, helping to educate and dispel the negativity around Indigenous people. Then, as I understand it, there was an incident with the local water supply in your community. It became polluted and unsafe to swim in. And Indigenous children were refused access to swim in the local pool. So you set off on a mission to build a pool that your community could use. And this is a great story, which is documented in the CBC series called Telescope, which we'll try to provide a link to. But it was through these events that led to your transitioning into a documentary filmmaker at the National Film Board of Canada. Can you give us a brief overview of some of the major stories that you've covered over the years?
Yes, at that time, we're talking in the 60s, 1960s is the time when they gave the power to vote to our people. And we became citizens of Canada. And there are a lot of things happen all over the country. All kinds of stuff that we were not allowed to do. All of a sudden, we were like powwows, ceremonies, and gathering of people. And, in the Indian Act, it said, if you gather more than 3 Native people together and you're angry at the government, you could go to jail. You were not allowed a lawyer. Let's say if we wanted to hire a lawyer to fight for our land that was stolen and all this terrible stuff, the lawyers could lose their license to be lawyers, because you had to have permission of Indian Affairs and the minister to go against them. So it's a horrible paper, the Indian Act. And all that, realizing that those books that were so damaging to our people, what also hurt more is me finding out that these books were written by the church. It was a religious form of educating, and it was very racist and very hateful to our people. So that also was another tough problem for me to understand.
Yes, that would be disturbing. I want to return to the 60s. Gaining the ability to get together and openly practice traditions had to be incredibly liberating, something that should have never been taken away in the first place. Can you take us back and describe the general atmosphere at the time? Was it as liberating as it sounds?
It was very, because we start having lots of ceremonies and go back. People were hiding to get together and celebrate or have spiritual ceremonies. All that was done in hiding. And now all of a sudden it was all right to do that. So everybody was celebrated everywhere in the different communities and different nations. It was very exciting at the time. It meant that previously, if a person wanted to go to university, let's say, you could not enter a university if you were not a Canadian citizen. So being an Indigenous person, you would have to let go of your status, of your rights, of having a property in the community, being part of it, to get into the university level. And now all this was gone.
Yeah.
So, there was a lot of things that changed for us. And if you think at where we are now today, I think it's extraordinary. I find myself very lucky to have lived this long to see the difference. Now, court, for instance, in the prairies, I spent quite a bit of time there in the early 60s. And I would go into the courtroom and there would be lines up, like long lineup of men and some women, but mostly men, with their hats in their hands, and they're all being accused of all kinds of stuff. Blah, 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 blah. You are guilty of doing this and that, 6 months in jail or 5 years or 10 years. And if you can't pay what you should pay in jail, they had no say. And I remember sitting there feeling so bad all the time because nobody wanted to hear them. They couldn't hire a lawyer. They had no money. As a matter of fact, at that time, I think it was in Regina, there were people that were trying to help, different organizations were trying to help. And one time, I think it was a lawyer who was connected to human rights, came there, and he said to that man who was going to go to jail, obviously, he said to him, how much money do you have? And that man said, I don't have any money. So the lawyer said, oh, I don't believe you. You have some money. And he says, no, I don't have any money. So the lawyer said, I don't believe you. Let me see your pockets. So he takes out his pockets, and he had 17 cents. Yeah. And the lawyer said, give me that 17 cents. That'll be my fee. I'm going to defend you.
Sort of a symbolic offering there. Well, I want to talk more about this path and the reconciliation path, if you will, later. But I want to dig in some of your skills as well. Similar to your work as a documentary filmmaker, conflict practitioners, mediators, peace builders, we find ourselves in the middle of a story where each party has a different narrative, and there's the challenge of digging past the surface issues and getting to the heart of the conflict and helping expose those deeper interests to create a greater understanding. Do you have any tips on either questioning tools or listening skills, anything at all on how you get to the root of those narratives for your films?
Well, you have to begin with that human beings all have rights. And all human beings have life. And for me, life is very sacred. And it's sacred for all people. So you go from there. You're allowed to be, you are a human being, you have a life. I respect you. I respect any person, anything that's living, because this is the root of who you are. And the fact that you have a life, it's sacred. It's beautiful. And people who try to make them feel that they don't deserve to live, well, then, you have to have reactions. You have to be able to recognize that and stop it. Just it's very simple. It all has to do with justice and allowed to be, and a respect for life. Even if you are on the street and you're drunk or you're having a miserable time today, you try to meet those eyes and say with those eyes, I respect you because you're living. You have a life. You're down now, tomorrow maybe you'll get up and you'll be okay.
So the importance of cultivating those core values of respect, justice, fairness, and valuing the sacredness of all life. Yeah, I agree. So important. That is a great spot to start. Okay, I'd like to talk about Ganasatake, your award-winning documentary covering the Oka crisis. This is an Indigenous group making a stand against the Canadian government in an armed conflict. It's a dangerous situation with a significant power imbalance. Can you describe what it was like on the ground during that crisis?
Well, it was very difficult and very scary. You never knew what's going to happen. And we were always afraid that, when we were behind a barricade, if a warrior or a soldier shoots one shot, we're finished, then there's going to be a massacre here. So that we were always on the wire like this, wondering. It was, of course, it was not an easy job to document this, especially because I'm Indigenous. I was really put down for it in every way. But when you look into your heart and you feel something is unjust and you want to work against it and you write, and you fight, nobody's going to stop you. Just as long as it's honest and it's for the right reason.
Looking back on it, is there a certain event or situation that stands out for you, that's most memorable to you? Was there something that made you realize the severity of it? Is there something that made you realize you were part of a significant historic moment? Are there any special memories that stand out for you as someone who was on the ground there?
The memories that I have that are most important to me are pretty simple. The danger and being afraid. If I said I wasn't afraid, I'd be lying. I was afraid, especially at night, because there was no lights at all. So if you heard somebody scream, you went towards that. What's happening? What's wrong? It was terrible. It was either the police, the army, the soldiers, and there were fights and the warriors. It was you could never have a resting sleep, really. You were always watching and wondering, and what are they doing now, this kind of things. And myself, being a person who was Indigenous there, it bothered a lot of people from all sides. So I got insulted a lot by the people in the town, by the police, by the soldiers. But if I was to say that's all I remember, I'd be lying, because there were a lot of beautiful things too. Here we are with guns everywhere. You have the police, the army, the warriors, everybody has guns. And you could look on the lake, just let's say starting the middle of the lake. People were with sailors, canoes, and as if nothing's happening. And here we were at war on this side of the lake. It was really unimaginable. And one day I said to the crew, we're going to go down there was a yacht club there. I said, let's go there and see what people are doing. So we go. And we're starting to take pictures. And I said to my camera person, I said, please don't turn the camera on when I'm not here. I'm just going to go and talk to this person here. And he started shooting, and it created a lot of problems. People came out, started calling him maudit français, and you defending the savages, this sort of stuff. It was very bad. So there's a police officer there. So I'm talking to the police officer, and the police officer said to me, These goddamn Mohawks, and he's swearing at them. They're awful. And I say to the police, you should learn the history. Maybe you wouldn't find them so awful. This is their territory here. No, they say, and he was just, I could not, he wouldn't believe anything I said. And while I'm fighting with him, another police officer comes over. He had been watching with, you won't believe this, a big bouquet of wildflower he picked up in the field. And he gave it to me. And he said, Madame Obomsawin, don't try with him. He's got a hard head. He's got his mind made up. But can you imagine? I was insulted a lot, but there was also this I never forgot.
Wow.
And he was so nice, and he says, don't worry, you don't have to leave, because I said to my crew, we'll just leave. I'm not here to get attention on us, So every now and then there was some very nice behavior from the police, from the soldiers, yes. And the everyday time, it was mostly insult, and they didn't like me being there. So you can imagine when the film came out.
Yeah. What would you say the significance of, not only the significance and the impact of the Oka crisis, but the importance of documenting it through your film?
I made 4 films there. It's not just one film.
4 of them.
Yes, the film board made a box set of them. There's four films and a book, and so which gives you a lot of information that you practically don't know if you don't, at the time what was happening.
In terms of the Oka crisis, though, making that stand, what would you say the impact of those actions in the bigger picture of Indigenous rights? And
it was incredible, because all the people that belong to any nation, they all had the same problem in terms of having their land stolen by the next door town, or all kinds of games are done politically, and they're always losing land and losing rights. So the stand really helped most people in Canada. It made them feel good and not being so afraid of standing for your rights. The Mohawks did that for everybody. So they didn't realize it probably at the time, but the gesture was extremely important. And as a result, the people at that time who were very angry at the Mohawks for doing this and have changed. People who put me down then say, it's very important what you did, and praise me now. The same people, the same journalists. So, and it makes me feel it's not lost. Like if you make a gesture, whether you make a film or you sing or you make a sculpture for a particular reason, you don't do that hoping to be praised. If you do that for that, you're finished. You never, you're talking history here. So I kind of expected it at the time. But what surprised me in later years, 30 years later, how different people are. They weren't listening to us then, but now they are. And as a child, you were made a fool, like people said, that language is Satan's language. I heard that all the time. And so in a lot of cases, some of the parents didn't teach the language to their children because they thought they're going to have just a hard life. They're better learning English or French or whatever. So it was a mistake then, right there too. But now, many of these languages are part of the educational system at the university level, high school, in the communities. They can teach the language without being punished. And it's a very, very different time. And I know that across the country as I travel, and I see people, their interest is respect. They want to know more. They encourage our students to learn their culture, to learn the language. Is very different. So to witness this for me is a big gift.
Wow. On the topic of respect changing over the years, have you noticed that play out with non-Indigenous negotiators in their negotiating style? So through the changing times and an increasing respect for Indigenous people, partly through measures such as your education efforts and whatnot, but did you also observe a change in how non-Indigenous negotiators engaged with Indigenous leaders? Did they
Different.
adopt a more respectful approach? And what impact, if they did, what impact would you say that that's had?
You just look around and our people have much more power than they ever had. And they're listened to. And they're not afraid of defending something they believe in. I think in terms of that part, I think we are very rich in terms of having people knowing their nation, knowing their language, standing there as equal, not as invisible and inferior.
Mm-hmm.
I am very encouraged. I think I'm always very touched by the interest that people have to hear us. They didn't before.
Yeah.
We talked, when I was touring the schools in the 60s, I went to a lot of residential schools. And people would say, here there's a cemetery, but we don't know who they are. The children are buried. We were talking about that then, but nobody was listening. They said the Indians, they're always complaining. Now they're interested and they're appalled by all this history and they want to know more. So that's the difference.
Mm-hmm. Your name, Obomsawin, means pathfinder, something you've lived up to. And you've also seen many other Indigenous leaders in action during crisis and challenging situations. What would you say are some personal qualities that make a successful leader?
I think, first of all, if you're a leader or a chief or whatever, what's lacking sometimes is the knowledge of the history of that particular nation. I think it's very important for whoever leads a nation should study the history, should know what all the people, what they went through, where they're going, what they want. You want to listen to them. And some nations are lucky because they still have a lot of old people living. And what you can learn from them is gold. It's once they go, a lot of the knowledge is gone too. And I think more and more people realizes this because having TV, having all this stuff that technology that keeps you so busy that you forget who's in your house. Is your grandmother there? Some houses have 3 generations living there. So to go back and spend time and listening to, they have photographs, they don't know who's on the photograph. Say, who's that? Let's see the old photographs. Who was that? They'll say, oh, this is an old aunt of yours. She did this and did that. And you learn about what your family was like. How did they survive in a country that was theirs and it was so unfriendly to them? What did they do? And you discover that they were so clever and how they cooked, how they made things. In my case, there was a lot of basket makers and canoe makers. Like, they were artists, but nobody recognized that.
Yeah, I agree that connection and understanding the past is so important for everyone, but especially leaders too, whether chief or even within an organization, to have a record of the history, the past challenges, the past decisions, and the culture is going to be pretty important to be an informed leader. Staying in this topic somewhat, I wanted to ask you about non-Indigenous negotiators engaging with Indigenous leaders. Are there any common culturally insensitive behaviors that you've seen that could have been easily avoided?
Oh yeah, I've seen a lot of that. Because in the past, especially people who had the power to control others really used it. And they had a way of making our leaders know that they had no rights, really. You can't do this, you can't do that. You can't be any more than 3 people at a time and gathering and all these different things, and they abuse and use this power that they had. But we have come to a different time now. And these people who have the power in government and other places are changing too. I think if they want to lead and have something over a nation, they better learn that history themselves and face it. And otherwise, nobody's going to listen to you.
Yeah. I'd like to shift into reconciliation. You've already described a number of positive changes that you've seen over the years. Progress is being made, and it's good to think of reconciliation as a process as well as an end goal. What does reconciliation look like for you?
I think what they've done is incredible for many reasons. First of all, they had a hard time to get to work the way they wanted to, because there was no success when it first began. It wasn't run by Indigenous people, and you could feel it. And now, it all changed when Senator Sinclair and Little Child and Wilson got a hold of it and start making changes and really listening to people. And I think that really changed the feeling of people who had gone through this miserable life of residential school, that they could tell their story and not feel less because they've gone through that. For a very long time, many of those people didn't want to say even that they went through that, because it was so humiliating. And to feel that this is where you spend so many years of your life was nothing to be proud of. So many people were silent. And now it's different. The fact that many of them told their stories and had a very hard time to do it, and for them to realize they're not less because they've gone through that. That is the contrary. And people recognize what they went through, and we love them, and we made them feel how important they are. And just that alone is a very beautiful thing for a family to be able to discuss these things and to be able to not feel less because you've been there. Yeah. And that alone makes a big difference. And all the books that they've come out with people's stories and the sound of their voices, and is priceless. That's a history that is very painful, but it's important that it is documented. I know how difficult it's been for all who work towards that. I'm not saying that it took away all the pain, but it certainly helped heal a lot of the heartbroken and humiliating stuff that went on. And so,
yeah, acknowledgements and recognition and being heard, all important in the reconciliation process. But another crucial thing you touched on is establishing that survivors are not less for going through that, a very personal, sensitive, and painful thing to discuss. And Mr. Sinclair and others have done a good job to establish a safe environment and the trust to have these discussions. Another important consideration here is forgiveness, which can be quite challenging considering the past treatment of Indigenous peoples by Canada, not only in the residential schools, but for the treatment of all Indigenous people, as you've been describing today. So forgiveness, not excusing or pardoning, definitely not forgetting, but letting go of resentment and anger for past abuses. Is forgiveness possible?
I think so. But what's most important is to learn what the real stories are, so that it's not repeated, so that you see it coming. And at the end of the line, it's not our people who are the poorest. I think the poorest one is the one who hit and wants to make sure that you don't exist, that you have no power, and I have the power over you. That's pretty much over now. You know?
Let's hope so. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Confederation of Bishops, Catholic bishops, released an apology last year, an official apology. But how important do you think it is for the Pope to apologize to residential school victims?
I think it's very important, especially for him. Imagine to deny what's happened, like these priests who made these girls pregnant and they had babies, and then they killed them, and then they buried them, and then, you know, awful, awful, awful stories. And if you don't feel, never mind apologizing, but if you don't feel that this is a very grave sin, if you want to call it sin, and especially if you are there preaching about God and that they know God so well, and at the same times, what are they doing with our people? Why is it all right for them to make these crimes, preaching something else? It's very serious.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean to say that they were all like that. There were some good people there too. Yeah. That's what I keep telling myself. There's good people everywhere. Doesn't matter what nation, what race. And I could prove it by many things that happened to me in my life. And you also see it in the news all the time. When things are so bad, somebody will come and save somebody, take care of, you know, it's so comforting to me, because I say it doesn't matter how bad things are, there's always some good people around that are going to change that. They're going to make you see something else. And that's what human beings are about.
I believe that as well. I don't know if it's your most recent, I don't think it's been released yet, but can you tell me a bit about Honor to Senator Murray Sinclair?
Yes, it's out now since September. Oh. You could watch it if you want. We'll have to give you a link, but you could watch it. Yeah, I'll get Michael to send you a link, because I don't know it by heart. But that's a good example. When he received this a very important award, and it was given to him through Miguel College, I phoned him up and I said, do you permit me to come and film when you're receiving the award? And he said, yes. Then I called up Miguel College to see if they permit me to do a shoot there in that room. The only trouble was, what made me angry is this. Miguel College is a beautiful college. They have nice rooms, and I know I've been in some of them. They had him in the cellar. It looked awful. And here's our senator who's representing thousands of our people, and we all look up to him, and he's so wonderful. It was ugly, like the background, and it looked so poor. And I thought, man, they could have put him in a nice room, when they have special things that's going on for them. But no, this is where he was. But forgetting that, every word he said, you're learning something. He's such an important person in our lives, and he knows the history very well. He's been a judge, been a lawyer, and you learn so much. You have a hard time to cut any word he's talking about, because it's so important. And of course, he talked a lot about residential schools, talked about the history. It's wonderful. And a short film, but people are really enjoying it.
I look forward to that, and I'll try to get the link available with these show notes as well, so other people can find it. So yeah, we've talked about the progress over the years to address discrimination to Indigenous people. What are some of the recent activities or rulings that you think have had a big impact and Canada pointed in the right direction, so to speak?
It takes time before government issues, like in this province here, we had a terrible happening where this woman from Manwan went to the hospital, and the nurses were so rude to her. And anyway, she died, and she turned on her phone, so she taped them. Joyce Ishakwan, I don't know if you heard about her. And it's an incredible story. When they tried to say that she was lying, they had the sound from her phone. Everything that went on, she taped it. That was so powerful. They called her name. She was on her dying bed, saying she was only good to, I don't want to say the vulgar name, but to sleep around, stuff like that, you know. She was a mother of children, and just that was like it used to be for a long time. Some areas it takes more time for them to learn something else. And this was the case just lately. And it really made people very angry, not just our people, a lot of people living here in this province.
Yeah, that's a terrible and sad situation. It must be especially disheartening for you as you've worked so hard to eliminate this ignorance and hatred. But to switch gears a bit here, we've talked about leadership and the path to reconciliation. Nelson Mandela was a great leader who tackled apartheid and racial reconciliation in South Africa. And I know you're also a big admirer of him. Can you speak about Nelson Mandela for a moment?
I learned just by reading the book that he wrote himself, his own biography. And I love his mind. Like he describes once he was in jail, you know, for 30 years, a long time, that sometimes there'll be some young Black people being tortured on the same level where he was. And they scream and cry, and they, you know, it's just terrible what they're going through. And I couldn't believe his reaction. He would scream also words to the young people that are being tortured to be strong enough to survive it, to be strong enough that, in other words, tell yourself it doesn't hurt that much, you're going to live and you're going to make things, you know, just that mind. And then he describes, he says that when he was being punished often because, you know, he always fought and he was a brilliant man. And sometimes he got beat up too. And he said he always made sure that the person who's torturing him or doing some very bad thing to him, that he would always make sure to meet the eyes of the torturer, that this being tortured by this man. And he says that he always saw a little light of something good in that person that's trying to kill him. I thought, man, that man had no wonder he became the president of his own country. The generosity of Nelson Mandela and the way of analyzing or I don't want to say that in English, to comprehend the minds of people and make them feel how important they were, all of them. So there was so much love and so much justice in himself. And he cared for people, for all people. And I love Nelson Mandela.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Well, in general, they'll never have to go through what I've been through. So I'm so happy about that. Yeah. That proves there is change. That's everything is possible now. That's what I keep telling the young ones. Just look in your heart. What's your gift? What would you like to be? What would you like to do? This is the time. The doors are open, and there are programs in every discipline you can think of to be helping out an Indigenous person to get educated or to do whatever it is they wish, which is wonderful.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about your music career. Can you describe the importance of music, especially how it relates to storytelling and educating?
Yes, it's very important because it's the voice of a country, it's the voice of your people, of a nation, and it must be respected. And it was from that time when I said to myself, I can sing, I know lots of stories, I know my history, I want the children to hear that history, not these books that are full of hate for us. And that's how important it was for me, the presence of my knowledge of what I knew, which is very little comparing to other people. But it really helped me to be heard and to be respected. And it's like that for every person. So that's how I used it.
The use of music and storytelling have a much longer history than filmmaking. How would you compare the two?
It's just like I always give this thing that, when I was a young girl, like we didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water, we had an earth road, we had a well, we had oil lamps. And at night, what do you think happened? They put on the oil lamps and people talk about all kinds of stuff. And in our case, a lot of the men at the fall time would leave because they'd go guiding for hunting and fishing. So they had lots of stories and always having to do with animals' behavior. And we just loved it. So, if you had 3, 4 kids listening to one story, we don't have any images. So each one of us imagine, we make images in our minds about what is being said. My cousin over here, it's another image and it's another message. And this is why I know that the voice is sacred for me, the word, because it's amazing. I always say to hear is to see, because when someone tells you something, you have a whole theater of images that comes into you. And it's very rich to just hear the history of people in the bush and having encounter with bears and deer, and the animals have history just like human. And that's, for me, so precious.
The mind fills in the the images, which is one reason why I think everyone always says that the book is better than the movie. You have the image of the character. It's all your internal images. It's not Leonardo DiCaprio or whoever they cast for that part, which is a big difference there. Do you have any final thoughts for Canadians, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, or for that matter, any group that's marginalized or working to move past a murky and unpleasant history to heal? I mean, that's a big question, but any final thoughts on that?
I think a lot of it is happening from people themselves learning and have a different way of thinking about the history of this country, first of all. And every now and then you encounter situations that are not very good. It's still there in some areas, but it's not the strongest. You're not forced to believe something that you know is wrong. What I also have seen, because since 2010 I've been working a lot in court, doing a lot of documenting on what's happening concerning our rights. In the 60s, when it was when we were becoming citizens of our country, as I told you, people were saying there's so many people in jail and all that stuff. And I used to sit in the courtroom often, just watch. And you'd see lineups of guys mainly, and women too, and no respect, no voice, no nothing. And since 2010, where I've been documenting what's happening in the courtroom, that's another incredible change. Are people coming to court being respected, can speak for themselves, There were even some ceremonies in the courtroom, would you believe it? I was so surprised, and it was just unbelievable that in my lifetime, I see our people having a voice in the court. They're listened to, I should say, and with such respect that I thought, if I die tomorrow, I won't worry so much anymore. Because that's the change.
Yeah. Yeah. One that we all thank you for being a part of, for instigating, for fueling, and for documenting. It's been an honor and a pleasure to speak with you today. And thanks for openly sharing your thoughts and wisdom with us.
Thank you for your interest. Everything helps.
Thanks for listening. If you want to hear more from international experts digging into a range of topics on conflict, power, and persuasion, subscribe to your favorite podcast app or visit us at cian.org. That's CIIAN.org.